Hello, I'm Martin Corley. I'm a physicist working up at the county hospital. For those down at the university, that's obviously up the hill. I've been a physicist within this kind of environment for about 30 years, and I'm doing reasonably okay. I'm still here after the COVID, or during the COVID. Just to put things in perspective, our trust, the United Lincolnshire Hospitals, employs about 8,000 people, and that's between Lincoln, Grantham, Boston and Louth. We do have a few outlying clinics as well, but it's quite a large workforce, and it's serving a population of about 800,000 people. And this is growing. Lincolnshire is becoming one of the places where people are coming to. And it's certainly part of the development plans for the county. The university is also developing a medical school supported by Nottingham University in the first instance. And this all builds up a background of improvements to the services here in Lincolnshire, which is being mirrored throughout the country on a national basis. A little bit more background. The NHS employs about 1.3 million people, of which about 26,000 are healthcare scientists. This works out to be about 2% of the total workforce and a budget of 150 billion pounds. I think that's a bit flexible at the current time because of all the inputs we've been having due to the pandemic. This 26,000 people is made up of a lot of different specialisms. So 2% might not seem like many, but these are the staff that do a lot of the really complex procedures that go on in the hospitals and in the labs. These are often the backroom people that we don't tend to hear about. So we see people like the clinical biochemists, where are we? The radiation physics safety, imaging with ionizing radiation, microbiology. These tend to be people who are not very patient-facing, but a lot of these are. So vascular science, urodynamics. The list is a bit all over the place. The gastrointestinal physiology. These are all areas where the scientists are actually dealing with patients as well. The blood samples you may have given go to people like the biochemists in the labs. The other specimens go through to the microbiologists. They interact with things like the public health system. So when you get notifiable diseases, it's the clinical scientists that have been working in the hospitals that have generally picked these things up first. These areas are typically doing around about 1.5 million tests a year for an organisation like ours. We've also got the people like the device and risk management group governance, part of clinical engineering. And they're the ones that have been the focus of a lot of the work that's been going recently, making sure that all the equipment that has been bought and purchased for COVID is fit for purpose. But they have their routine work to do here as well. So they are making sure that any equipment that is used is appropriate. It is working properly, that people know how to work with it, and it is fit for purpose. All these are also on the Healthcare Profession Council state registration as clinical scientists. And a clinical scientist is somebody who can give clinical advice. So often in the background, when you're talking to a medical profession, a doctor or a consultant, they have sort of advice from people working in these areas. Clinical bioinformatics is also here, as we see, and it's split up into these 3 different versions. So what is clinical bioinformatics? Well, the examples are clinical biochemistry is biology and chemistry, biophysics is biology and physics. What is bioinformatics? Is it biology and informatics? I think the little schematic here is tending to say it's not really. One alternative way of looking at this is bioinformatics minus biology is what? I think that's not quite right either, because we're actually seeing that we need a variety of skills. So here we're actually showing that we need the medical involvement, the biology understanding, physics, computer science, and these are all going up to make, in this graphic, bioinformatics. I believe that there's probably a lot more going on around there as well. Actually, it is a truly skill mixed discipline. Pulling this talk together, I did look for examples that might be useful in terms of giving you an idea of what was involved in it. So example scenarios were actually quite difficult to find. A quick search on the internet often leads you to the biogenetic or bioinformatics genetics, but it is wider than this. To some extent, this specialism is still being developed by the people coming into the area, and it will continue to grow for some time. The computer science is the tool which is being used by these other groups, but these people are very important in actually delivering that. They need to be agile, responding to the healthcare needs as they are changing. And we're actually seeing that a lot of those healthcare needs are changing quite rapidly. Even within a year, things can move on. So a little bit of focus on the actual course offered by the National School of Healthcare Sciences. The background of people coming into the area is detailed here, and I can just talk about that. And I think the first thing to note is that people working in bioinformatics are from a significant number of backgrounds. And again, we've got genetics mentioned heavily there, health informatics, and courses with significant IT content or equivalent. I'm not quite sure what the equivalent is, but it is in there. I suppose it's more of a coverall. The training that you go through is also set up to encourage networking right from the beginning. So you are talking to people who are from all these different areas, and it's becoming embedded in how you work. There might be 26,000 healthcare science workers within the NHS, but within this particular area, there are only in the order of low hundreds. And the actual computer science is only a small percentage of that. It really is a developing science area within the health system. Genomics is probably the most talked about aspects of clinical bioinformatics. The dream is to be able to identify how all genes work and when they work, and sometimes know how to stop them working. This requires an awful lot of databases with a lot of information. And it's how we pull it all together that brings the message through about how that is being used for our particular patient. Health informatics is one of the fastest growing areas of health. It involves intelligent use of information and technology to provide better care for patients. The physical sciences, perhaps this is the one I'm most closely involved with, is really generally concerned with image data, but even image data can mean a variety of things. So we have been perhaps all used to hearing about CT or MRI scans, but there are other image-like data sets. data sets that can be subject to similar manipulations that we can apply to images. And a good example would be radiation doses that we generate. So they actually look like an intensity map in 3-dimensional or even 4-dimensional space. And we can start to look at how that works with that particular patient. Each of these specialisms provide a different slant on what is in essence patient data. So to look at a little bit in the genetics, here I have a list of fish. And you might say, what has that got to do with people? Well, actually, first of all, the thing is, this kind of information shows the extent to which networking is important. People who know about fish can work with somebody who knows about people. It's the collaboration, the understanding of how genes work in a particular environment can apply wherever that gene is switched on. So knowing that a particular gene that occurs in a fish also occurs in a person means that we can understand what that gene is doing. The gene, after all, is simply a sequence of nucleotides, A, U, G, and C, which is then used to create this messenger RNA, which is then used to build the proteins. So we are seeing that understanding what those genes are doing in their native area in a fish can be used to work out what it's doing somewhere else as well. There isn't really no difference. If it's switched on, it's switched on and working. So within a hospital, I think the other question is, what do these clinical bioinformaticians do? That's quite a long phrase to say, and it doesn't feel quite right, because they are involved in a lot of things. It's not just information, it's not just informatics. I think one of the problems faced by all healthcare workers is the availability of data. And I think here we can see we have a set of patients' notes. And it's no exaggeration to say that could easily be a set of patient notes. All 3 piles. How do we understand what's going wrong with that patient if the notes are presented like that? Nobody can actually work through that realistically and have the information to hand to say, this is what's going on with the patient. The robustness of data, handwritten, text-based, are things that cause problems. So what we would ideally like is to have pick fields, so you've got very set data, but actually when you're working with the users, they're in busy environments and they're saying, we need to be able to do things, we need to be able to put the comments down as we see them. So it still becomes a very free text thing, even though we are starting to computerize these systems, working towards more electronic patient records. The idea of this healthcare record is still an idea. Imagine notes from each GP visit, a hospital visit, all the lab tests, the scans available everywhere you need them. That's a long way from, actually, I'm on holiday and I've just had to go to a hospital. Where are my notes? Because something's cropped up again. That's the ideal. That's what we're looking for. And this is one example of information related to patients, showing that we can provide a better service for that patient wherever they could be. And it's all by having people in the background putting all these things together. The consultants that we see at the coalface, seeing the patients, also see the benefits of databases, and often, certainly from our experience here, set up their own database. because the information available to them isn't enough. So they are making their own notes, recording things so that when the patient comes back, they can look at it again. At one stage, there was over 150 separate stores of data here within our trust. I won't necessarily call them databases. An Excel spreadsheet is a set of information. This is what our IT department knew about. Things are changing, things are improving, and we are moving forward. How can all these things be brought together to make progress feasible? So to kind of wrap up some of those thoughts, what is it we are really trying to do? There's a lot of information. Can we look for patterns within that data? Can we look at the cohorts of patients? Is there patterns of referral? Is there dynamics within what's going on? And once we have information within the trust, can we do automation on it? Having APIs, application program interfaces, on clinical systems means we can start to manipulate data a little bit more automatically. And certainly within radiotherapy, where I work, that is a very big thing. And I'll come on to talk about some of those things as well. Interpretation. Can we use this information to provide better decision support tools so the information is gathered together in a more appropriate way? Can we actually present it in a better way? Can it also lead to what we've all been hearing about, more machine learning, deep learning, expert systems applied to this data? And I think one of the most important things is, are these systems usable, human factors? Can we actually sit down and work with them for the benefit of the patient? So to focus on something from my own area, here we can see a body outline or body contour, and this is generated automatically from CT scans. So we can see a body contour. There's a pair of legs just starting to emerge. Obviously, we don't have a full body set of data because we don't want to put radiation into the patient other than where it is necessary. And we can obviously see that it is actually fairly straightforward to extract a body contour. It's a threshold on an image. You can identify the body, but let's think about how we identify some of these other organs within. It's probably a little bit small, but it's really to give the impression. So we have a prostate here. There is very little difference between that and the surrounding tissue. Even the people, the radiologists, the consultants trying to delineate it, usually use their understanding of where it is with a vague perception from the imaging to really outline it. There are things that are more obvious. Bowel gas, for instance, produces a contrast point. If we're talking about lungs, they're fairly straightforward to outline as well. But thinking about lungs, it's an organ which it's not solid. It's also got a very tree-like structure, and it fades in and out of being air into tissue. So there is a point at which you say, actually, that is lung tissue and that is not lung tissue. And it's that area where it becomes a little bit more equivocal. So we are not dead set on where it is. Machine learning has been used, but it is only slowly making inroads. And we do have systems that we have example sets and we can apply them, and it will try and do deformations to produce a better or a set on a new patient. But it's not true machine learning, which I understand is starting to do this process. The other structures that you can see are radiation beams that we have put on. What they are doing is conforming, as you can see at the end of the structure, to the shape we are trying to expose. And what we have got is systems, algorithms, that can optimize the way this radiation is delivered. but it does need the structures, the organs, to be defined in the first place, and also to have criteria applied to them. Systems like this would allow more time to look at the clinical impact of the treatment. So I can certainly envisage within a few years where all this is automatically done, and the person who used to do that is now focusing on giving a clinical interpretation. Is it right? And it's changing the job roles to be more appropriate, rather than spending time laboriously putting beams on, actually creating the calculations in the first place. We're now looking at the clinical impact of that and actually providing that clinical information to the medical staff that I was talking about right at the beginning. It really does change people's jobs, and it makes it more appropriate what they are doing. Do we always need a full CT scan? What I've got here are stereo cameras, and there's actually 3 pairs, which can generate, and I'll get rid of it. What we can do is generate a surface. So again, we're actually also interested in the consequences of what we do. If we don't have to give radiation, we shouldn't. So what we can do is apply new technologies. These are the things that are improving the way we do things. So here we have a surface that is generated just visually, and we can then understand whether or not the patient is in the right position. We are using this now. This is live within our centre, and it has improved the accuracy of what we do. And that is through a combination of disciplines all working together. And if the patient moves, the radiation stops. But this is supported by these bioinformatics people helping us to understand what we are trying to achieve. I think this actually is a very exciting area. Here we've gone from a CT set, which is almost a static snapshot, to something that is mapping the patient as they are being treated. What we want to be able to do is be assured that the surface is a representation of what is going on with that patient. And the anatomy in the thorax is fairly straightforward. In this particular case, we have a breast treatment, but we have a heart, we have a lung, we have the esophagus, we have other organs going through that area, and they're actually fairly straightforward. They don't move around too much. Once you get into the abdomen, you have a much more interesting scenario whereby even things like the uterus or the prostate do rotate, do change position. And what we want to be able to do is assure ourselves that when we are treating them, that they are in the right position. And again, once it goes out of tolerance, once the body shape has changed, we can then go back into a planning process or stop the treatment, whatever we need to do to get things back in track, to get the right radiation dose, the right dose in the right place at the right time. To carry on this, it's not just always about the patient. We also have to quality assure things. And I'm trying to pull examples from my own area of work to make it a little bit more easy to understand. So here we have a device that can measure radiation and give us results. What we want to be able to do is say, actually, the results that are being produced today, so as you can see, we have got lots of data, and it can produce it over a number of days, a number of QA quality assurance tests. What we want to be able to do is say the machine is behaving appropriately today as it was yesterday. So the hypothesis that we are addressing here within this kind of quality assurance is that can the patient-specific treatment be delivered by this machine? So before the patient even gets onto the treatment couch, we are fairly certain that the machine is going to be able to deliver that treatment. And moving forward, we can take that data and show that it actually fits a normal population. And it might look like a very boring, dull graph, but that is music to my ears, because it tells me the machine is doing the right thing. It's a good population, and this is where the bioinformatics really comes in. People who understand data and understand that the cohorts of data, the groups of data, are just as important as the single item of data. This particular measurement fits on the curve. It's within the 95% confidence interval. It's good. That's good data. My machine is behaving. It's doing the right thing. Whether that's one of our radiation devices or something in cardiology or a scanner producing images in the first place. This is the kind of thing we really do want to see. Some heavy duty computation now. So again, talking about radiation. Monte Carlo, place in south of France, the Principality, obviously deals with the odds, and we have seen this applied to things like understanding stochastic processes. So we have here a geometrical design of a LINAC bunker. So a LINAC would be sat in there. It isn't actually in there at the moment, but we have a scattering center, and we have the code which can simulate the radiation transport. And the diagram here shows what happened when you have a beam coming in, hitting a scattering center, which in this case is not a patient, but it shows what happens to the radiation within the room. This is a kind of macro scale investigation of radiation deposited. And it allows us to ensure the safety of these areas for staff, for patients, and visitors alike. When we are treating, we only have a patient within the room. The staff would be outside controlling it. It almost looks like a cloud chamber. You've probably seen pictures of those where we've seen cosmic radiation coming in and creating a cloud chamber view. And it does look like that. We're only getting a path where energy is being deposited. So these are as the radiation is slowing down through the air in this case, and then the concrete. It's obviously traveling some way into the concrete. And as you can see here, this is actually 2.7 meters thick. So when you're up in the hospital, you don't need to worry about the radiation escaping. It's fairly well and truly contained. These in silico explorations are just as important as trying it out on the equipment. We can actually do things in silico that we can't do in real life. We can work with the results at that level, at that point where it is depositing the dose. So we have a measure of its energy, we have a measure of other parameters, the direction, things like the polarization of it are all recorded. But we don't just have to apply it to these kind of scenarios. Here we have, and again, this is, it is part of the kind of Monte Carlo approach, but it's looking at it at a molecular scale. I don't know whether it's coming across very well, but right at the bottom, it's showing the timing. So for that first section, that was in picoseconds, and this is now in nanoseconds. So we are pushing the limits further. We are investigating the impact of radiation on chemicals right at the heart of cells. So this is really what's going on inside a cell. Let's think back to that genomic work, and we can start to see how, through our fundamental understanding of data, we can better harness the therapy effects of things like radiation. So just to go through that, there's the radiation being deposited, and these are the proteins, the chemicals, the interactions on a chemical scale, on a different time frames as well. So we do see that radiation interacting in a physics timescale there on that picoseconds, but then obviously on a more of a chemical reaction time frame. And then when we think about the cell and its neighboring cells, we are starting to see what happens in the biological time frames. So we are bringing a lot of information together here. It might seem a long way from some of the other things I've talked about, but it's all part of the same kind of story. It's all about information. So within this kind of area, there's something called system biology, and certainly I've seen information or presentations, talks, and when you talk about a cell, you can be looking at up to 150,000 different chemical reactions going on at any one time. And it becomes about likelihood, which is why it becomes all about Monte Carlo and about those stochastic processes. In the previous slide, we were looking at the radiation here, or the physics side of things. Here we are looking at a biochemical mashup of that initial radiation with a chemical interaction. So we've talked a little bit there about all sorts of patient-associated data. We can also talk about bringing the patient in to this picture as well. This is something that is starting to happen now, and it's all about patient-reported outcomes, PROs. And it is starting to be part of the picture, of the overall picture of what's going on with the patients. Here we've got the general idea, and it can be almost anything going in here. The financial burden on a patient can affect their quality of life. What's going on with them, the behaviors, what are they doing? It all feeds into how well they respond, what's their problems, what is causing the underlying issues. So this is in contrast to the data we've so far seen, which is all generated by health professions, which has been sometimes text or other things or image, but they've all been context sensitive. This is broadening the context, making it actually a more complex picture altogether. And certainly patient-reported outcomes are not always context sensitive. They are thinking about the things that they are thinking about at the time and not about necessarily their overall health picture. It's not on its own, but it does, in combination, make a much bigger picture of the health of a patient. Once a patient is discharged, it is difficult to keep tabs on what they are doing, or how well they are doing. Sometimes we don't even know whether they are still alive or not. So when we are looking at whether or not our treatments are effective, it can be very difficult. All this does accumulate a lot more data. We could not possibly hope to sift through all of it. It is like those notes we showed earlier. Sifting through all this information is a superhuman task, if you like. And this is where these automations come in. Systems we have kind of hinted at, the AI, the machine learning, etc. Summarizing information. But we do have to make sure that it is coming to the right conclusions to support the health professions looking after the patient. It has to be put into the right context. We have to know that whatever systems are working correctly, that they are doing the right thing. And I think we've all seen, certainly within the social media area, a lot of difficult information being portrayed incorrectly. So we have to make sure that we don't do those things. It's very difficult. And coming on to one of my favourite subjects is human factors. And I've simply put here the geometrical design for the last bunker we built here. And we did change it significantly. but it's about making the place easy to work in, to reduce risks so that we are part of what's going on. It has to be part of the process as well, though. It has to be what we do, whether it's actually designing parts of a building or designing software or designing it for other people to use. It has to be appropriate, it has to work properly, and it has to be logical. And we're also having to comply with the data protection regulations as well. Now, I've tried to sketch out a lot of what goes on, what could potentially goes on, and some developments. I think just to give you a bit of information about actually here we've got something from the World Health Organization about issues. People do make mistakes. This is where we are designing things, where we are creating systems that people are using, we have to factor in what we should be looking for. We need to do proper assessments on how we deliver it, how we train people for it as well. But in essence, we shouldn't be blaming the human beings when we've put systems in place that are not working correctly. That's about human factors. So, a little bit about the specialisms, or where we can find information out. The National School for Healthcare Science were set up in 2011 to start bringing together all these specialisms into one place. There were training schemes before, and in fact we here have been training medical physicists for the last 30 or 40 years, certainly well before I got here. But we have been brought into this whole scheme. So there's some information here where you can go and have a look about what's involved. Again, you can search. A lot of the searches for bioinformatics do come up with just the genetics, though. It is a broader subject and it is developing. And to explain a little bit, so within the genomics area, a couple of years ago, this was what was being advertised through the training scheme. And as we see, nationally, only 16 posts were being recruited. And they were not particularly spread out generally. Obviously, genetics is a more specialised area, and there are only a few centres. And actually, I'll just bring in there. So one of the centres was advertising, the majority of training will be delivered at Southmead General Hospital in Bristol, but a few days will be spent in Exeter Genetics Laboratory. So actually, that is quite a big distance to be covering. We ourselves are working with Nottingham to deliver our genetics rotation. Health informatics, again, of only a small number of places. Last year we did recruit somebody. Unfortunately, she can't be here today. I was going to actually give her a couple of minutes to talk about her experience. But we did recruit somebody. So here we've already got something going and starting to work on. But there aren't many places, so 7 there. And for the physical sciences, and again, we actually tried recruiting, but we were unsuccessful because there were very few people applied. But there were only 6 posts that year. So I think onto my final slide, just to reiterate, if you would like more information, you can email me. There is my email address. It's fairly straightforward, martin.corley, and then that's the ULH NHS UK email address. And if you can't remember all of it, just Martin Corley. It's a fairly standard format. I have tried to give a broad view of what a complex area of work this is. It is very varied. I think you can safely say that. I think there are a huge number of potentials and opportunities. It is still developing, and I think the people coming into it will help to develop it into something very fit for purpose. And I think these newer areas that we've touched on are how the NHS is keeping up with the times. We do have to change the NHS as things go on. Things are changing, and they are keeping up with things. They are keeping up with the issues facing society. And it is making a healthcare that is fit for that future. And I think, thank you very much.
Martin, can I ask you a question?
Yes, certainly.
How far do you think we are, as NHS, are from personalized medicine?
We are seeing some of it already. Not necessarily within radiotherapy where I work, but in some of the other areas, the genetics is making a big impact in terms of how patients are being treated. So people with particular traits in their genes are having more appropriate treatments being delivered to them. It's not as far as we want to go, but it is certainly there already. In radiotherapy, I think we've got examples where we know some patients will benefit from treatments more than others, and we're not yet there where we can actually identify those kind of scenarios. So there's a range, we know about them, but we can't get in yet to actually, there are areas where it is already happening. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I have long list of questions, but I will start with a comments. And before that, I would like to thank you ever so much for really being here and exchange that kind of knowledge for us. There are a lot of tips I've got for me, and I will be talking about that aspect of it. So one of the comments I'm having on my long list is that the University of Lincoln, as well as College of Science and School of Computer Science, are working closely with yourself and the NHS within the county and the country to address all of those needs as possible. And to be honest, putting the hat on myself as a lead, one of the lead within the school, is that how we address this matrix of skills, knowledge needed into that. We are going to have a cloud computing, master in cloud computing very soon to address the need in this. And also a conversion course into data science and applied analysis, where more from different backgrounds could come and join this master to have their knowledge up to skill in that kind of sense. And also on behalf of the school, I'm welcoming to any courses to develop the right skills needed by NHS. One of the questions I would move with that, it's very interesting to know how much biology integrated into different things, and also as a result with a bioinformatics. But we haven't got the answer of biology plus.
No, we haven't. We haven't.
It is interesting, to be honest, to know the combination, a permeation and combination of different skills needed to address the bioinformatics. Is it like knowing programming full stop, or knowing AI full stop, or need the cloud computing as well as other things?
I think it's probably the biggest question, to be honest. And I do feel that bioinformatics is probably the wrong title for this subject. I've always been a believer that we need clinical computer scientists involved, and they mix with other people. So we need a core who can do the programming and bring big chunks of code together. And although my background is physics, I did spend 3 years doing artificial intelligence. And I did a lot of coding through that, and I can see that the analyst position in between where you're saying, this is the kind of things we need, and how do we bring them all together?
Sure.
I suppose I'm in an ideal position to be able to do that. But it is about having that mix of skills, not necessarily all in one person. So you need somebody with biology background. And in fact, our bioinformatician who's come in this year has got a joint degree in biology and maths, but she did have a heavy IT content to her course. I still don't know quite what that means. She's ploughing on with doing coding now and kind of making things do the right thing. But that's a background. But I can see, certainly with some of the computing I've come across in the last 5 years, things have moved on so much that I would actually be worried about somebody from a very narrow background, maybe just a biologist coming in and picking up some of those skills, which is why we do need to bring everybody together. And I think they are doing the right thing within the school, this national school, in terms of not being singular. They are emphasizing the fact that they do need to have networking, and the education component is being delivered. The masters is being delivered by Manchester for the genomics, and then health informatics, it's also Liverpool, and for the physical sciences, it's also King's College down in London. So it's quite a spread out thing. But Manchester have written a paper on how to educate this group. And I did actually come across it, and I thought that was quite interesting, because it was about making sure that they are talking to the right people, that they are getting the right breadth of understanding before they even start ploughing right down into what they should be doing in the narrow focus. So it is, I don't think it is a bioinformatics. I think it is something else. I suppose it's just a name that they can use, and it does group things together.
Yeah, I think that's in line with the vision of the College of Science as well as School of Computer Science, into an interdisciplinary approach of delivering that kind of content, with a lot of examples integrated into that and hands-on as well. And I like the slide where it's been written in examples, and when you list those examples of AI, data science, and all of those aspects, it's interesting how it can be seen from academic perspective, and how that can be reflected into students' one. So I had one of my students who came to ask me, do I have the right skills for the market? And we've been going around and doing a kind of shopping, reverse engineering into the market, and see the right skills if they have it. And this is our job, and this is kind of a vision we are having integrated into developing the programs within the school. It's fully understanding. The reflection came from industry, the right sector like yourself, to tell us what's the need, and what are these needs, and how we reflect it nicely into hands skills, brain knowledge, and the right time to be used in the right place.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things when I was trying to put this, or pulling this together, was I was thinking, because I'm also involved with the School of Physics, and I was thinking they run a kind of, it's almost a workshop, and I did feel that we perhaps should be trying to tackle this a bit more head on, certainly from our perspective and the new medical school perspective, that we're engaging with the college and trying to bring people together. It gives opportunity to students and staff alike from both sides, or from all sides, to actually gain an understanding of what's needed and what can be achieved. And I think running it between the three different areas, the university's medical school, the college of science, and the hospital, I think would be quite an eye-opener. And he does talk about the industry, because it is an industry, it's a big thing. We have to get things done. The product is a well patient, but it still needs to be done.
Sure.
And we have to do it right.
absolutely. Thank you so much. Wenting. And by the way, Wenting is our one of our scientists within the school who dealing with image medical imaging, correct, Wenting?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You are muted.
Yeah, sorry, I'm muted. Actually, I think we visited Martin before.
We have, yes. I came down and we did a little brainstorming session.
Yeah. So actively searching collaboration with.
Which reflect another area where we're going with, and it's not only about course from A to Z to pass and full stop. It's about research integration into teaching, into delivery, and tackling the actual problem, and hopefully or smaller problem to be tackled by students and or by researchers and so on. So we do have a lot of, I would say, hands in research and collaboration from that perspective with medical sector or with healthcare sector as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So if there's no more questions, thank you very much, Martin, for your talk.
Welcome.
And we'll pass on to the next enhancement. Enjoy the next enhancement session for the audience. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good Christmas.
Good to see you, Martin. Thank you.